Welcome everybody to the January version of the JETfornish Operator Meetup. It is my big pleasure to welcome our host, Ken Huizenga. And Ken's going to kind of walk through. We got some really good technical resources on the call today. Basic, setting up and prep and maintenance so that your year's worth of embellishment goes smoothly. So without further ado, let me hand it off to Mr. Huizenga. Ken, how you doing, buddy? We're looking forward to learning some things from you today.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. It's great to see you all. It's a subject that I get really excited about, and I prepared a list of some things that I think you'll find helpful. I'm going to start whether you have a MGI machine or you have a KM machine. These all transfer over. So I'm going to kind of get started from the beginning of the machine and talk about some things right off the get-go from the feeder end of it, and we'll progress throughout the rest.
And Ken, just before we kick off, I mean, we've gotten a lot of messages from operators who can't make these meetings because they're in the middle of production or they don't have access to a webcam. What do you want to say to those operators that can't actually join us live?
Well, I think that if you can make time to watch these videos, you're going to find them helpful, especially we have the resources from the manufacturers here, which is really valuable. And I also think that if you have a question, you can go to thejetfornish.com, you can post on the forum, and we will get back to you. We monitor it. We all get updates as to the fact that you did post, and we will. Yeah. I will, with my best of my ability, either answer the question or reach out and get you an answer. It won't sit. You won't be ignored. We will be there for you. Yeah. Whether it's tactical or KM, we will get back to you. So don't feel like you're by yourself.
Right. So what did you have in mind? Like, what are some of the big things? Because those of us who don't know you, those of us who do know you, you have a lot of experience with inkjet. You have a lot of experience. I think you were the second JETvarnish installed in North America. What are some of the key things that, we have Devin's going to talk about what's on the book. What are some of the things that you might have learned that are not necessarily on the book in terms of making sure your production is smooth?
Well, if you start at the beginning of the machine, I think one of the most important parts of the machine is your in-feed belt, your registration belt, and your compressors. Right? Without air, without vacuum, you're not going to get very far. And those Becker compressors have a one big screw in the middle, and if you take that screw off the side cap, you're going to be amazed what's in there. You've got exhaust filters, you've got intake filters. Those are huge. If you're ignoring those at the beginning of the year, this is the time. Pull them off, take them outside and blow them off. Do not blow them off in your production area. Those carbon vanes inside those pumps do wear, and they do give off carbon, and you will find yourself on a regular basis tightening that suction adjustment to the point where you're actually maxed out. Those pumps don't run good maxed out. They like to run in a balanced fashion, about 50 in and 50 out. So you need to make sure that you take those filters outside, you get them clean, and if it's been long enough, you can't clean them good enough. So make sure that you get those on your order list and maintenance list so you can get those replaced. The margin table I mentioned, that's what brings that sheet in, presents it to the machine, and it needs to be parallel and straight. Sometimes you may find yourself fine-tuning it in order to bring your image in on your editor. You don't want to be making an adjustment on your editor every time because your margin table is crooked. Yeah. So you need to make sure that that's square, and if you take that back cover off, you're also going to be surprised if there's a drive belt that drives that big belt. And it can get loose. The little cam follower that tracks it can get loose. It can get full of dust and garbage, and it doesn't get proper traction. Yep. You need to take a look at that belt because it does a lot of work. So we need to clean that up too, and also clean the belt itself, the big green belt itself that pulls that sheet in. Your marbles get dirty. It's a complete thing, right? You want to start at the beginning of the year. You want to make sure that all those things are looked at. So when you're having problems, you're not trying to bury it under layers and layers of lack of maintenance.
And how often were you doing that kind of maintenance on the compressor, for example, and the margin table in your experience?
Compressor for sure once every 6 months.
Okay.
The environment tends to get a little bit dirty, And we'll talk about in a little bit what can happen under your machine, but that compressor also tends to give off a little bit of dust. So if you've got that green sticky roller you're cleaning, you're doing that on a regular basis, that's all great, but you need to pull the covers back sometimes and take a look at what's underneath. There's a lot of airflow being generated, and you could be getting contaminated print before you even get to the print engine. So really important to take a good look at that at the beginning of the year.
Great point. Devin, Sean, Natalie, if you guys want to jump in, please. If you have any comments on that, or you have an experience, don't hesitate. This is an open forum, right?
Yeah, those are great points that Ken made, especially with the filters. You've got filters in your UV LED for the smaller machines that we recommend monthly, maybe taking out and blowing them off with some compressed air. So yeah, those are definitely, the filters need to be cleaned at least monthly.
Yeah, very cool. All right, what else you got for us, Ken? Is that so? Now we're past the feeding, right? So we were picking up the sheet. We're on the margin table. We're putting that. We're about to get to the engine. Aside from taking off the back cover, cleaning the drive belt that you're talking about, cleaning that green, I guess sometimes blue mat that's conveying the sheets, and the marbles. Don't forget the marbles. What else are we looking at?
The first thing that you're going to hit on the print engine is that belt that has all the holes in it, that has the vacuum that pull the sheet in.
Right.
You need to take a credit card or an old room key from a hotel, and you need to start pushing that varnish with that key and getting that varnish loose. It will crumble. You can scrape it. You can gently scrape it with those cards. It does come up. But here's where I get a little finicky, and this is where I think it's really important. I know companies like Home Depot and Grainger both make a small shop vac that's about the size of a gallon milk jug. When you scrape that varnish loose, you need to vacuum it immediately before you forward that belt. You can go to the pilot, you can advance it, but I've seen operators loosen it all up and continue to wind the belt and not remove it, and now you've got even a bigger problem because all of it gets spread out throughout the print engine. So it's really important to get that off, to get that scraped. And if you're thinking it's not important, those inkjet heads sit about 1.5 mil off of the sheet when the engine prints, and that's 37 microns of varnish. So if you get one sheet that has misfed and sprayed that belt with varnish, and it's more than 37 microns, you actually already could have a potential rub point and a defect. And you're looking for dust or contaminants or trying to purge ahead. And it's the simplest thing. You're just not keeping a clean house.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that is removed on a regular basis. And I wouldn't wait 6 months for that, or even annually for that. I'd be looking at that every Monday morning, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
One corner that's bent up, one it misses the vacuum, it catches on something going in. That's it. That's all it takes. Because by the time the machine shuts down, you've got a print on your belt. So please clean that up. It's really super important.
Yeah, I agree with the monthly, the weekly of scraping the belt, and definitely using the vacuum to clean it up. Another thing I like to do, if there's little specks that you can't quite get up with the vacuum, what I'll do sometimes is kind of use some tape and kind of wrap it around my hand, and then you can kind of stick it onto the belt and get all those little pieces that sometimes the vacuum doesn't like to pick up.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea. I didn't even think of that one. So here you go, guys. Your valuable tips. And again, I just want to mention it again that those heads get really, really close to the sheet of paper. Anything that's on that belt, whether it be varnish or dust, is super important to get rid of. So, and underneath that belt is also your sensors, the timing sensors for everything on that machine. They need to be cleaned. Do not use alcohol. Use a little bit of water on a Q-tip and blot it first and clean them up that way. Do not use anything solventy. Do not use MRC or blanket wash. And alcohol can even cloud them a bit. So clean those and clean those often. Your timing and your sheet registration will thank you for that.
Sounds like you learned that the hard way.
Yeah. And you're in a printing environment, and people go, "Oh, They use MRC on the metering roller cleaners on the presses, and it's chlorine free. It will be great. Yeah, it is. It's great. It cleans well. It'll clean the finish right off the sensor. So you'll be out of adjustment soon trying to max out those sensors. So be careful with what you use. I've heard people using simple green too.
Okay.
And I don't know, Devin, if you can use the head cleaner on the sensors, but I don't think you can.
No, we don't want to use the flush on the reflectors either. What I always recommend is literally just using the little foam tips that you use to clean the heads. You can kind of stick it in between the little holes in the belt and clean it that way. I was gonna say something else. I can't remember.
It's gonna come to you, man. It's gonna come to you. Just pop in when it does.
Yeah, sure.
The next thing that's really important and then often neglected is your varnish compartment. When you're sliding that bottle in, it gets nasty quick. And even if you use gloves, you pick up fingerprints on your gloves, you transfer them to the doors, you transfer them to the hoses. You got varnish on the inside of the hoses and outside of the hoses. That needs a good thorough cleaning. You need to remove both those bottles. You need to wipe it out. You need to, at least annually, in my opinion, and some people might want you to do it every time you change a bottle of varnish, but lift that straw out of the varnish bottle and the cleaner bottle and take one of your lint-free wipes and wipe that straw, because you're going to transfer a little bit of sediment from one container to the other, and you need to wipe that off. You do not want to transfer anything to a new container of varnish. It's gold. It needs to be treated like gold. Right. And you want to make sure it's as clean as possible. I'm going to mention in a little bit a little trick of mine for underneath there, which we'll get to at the end, but that compartment is really important. And you don't, when you're in the middle of a run and you need to make a change and a quick change to keep things going, that's not when you want to do your maintenance. You don't want to stop your run. You don't want your boss to see it cleaning when the half of the job is done. So you got to get in there and clean that cabinet. It's really important.
Smart.
The drying units in your machine, whether it's the one that sets, the UV, the IR, they all have lenses. They all have windows that can potentially, especially on a jam up, get smeared with varnish. I recommend taking one of your lint frees, putting it underneath, kind of using it like you'd shine your shoes, move it from left to right, get those wiped off, and make sure they're super clean. There's also heat sinks that are on the outside of those dryers, especially on the older machines. Those heat sinks pick up a lot of garbage and dust. Get in and vacuum those as well. And it's not super recommended, but I want you to take a look every once in a while whether or not all of those LED and UV lights are actually on. You can turn them on manually. You can look underneath. It did surprise me once. I had a bank of lights on one of my dryers. It was completely out, and I wondered why my foil wasn't sticking in a 1-inch area. So you got to get a good look at those and see. Sometimes you can see if they're weak, right? They're emitting a certain wavelength of light, and they're emitting it at a certain intensity. So take a look at those. Make sure that they all look about even, and that's just a good practice to do, maybe even once a month, so that you can talk to your technical people, and maybe if you see it starting to fade or not working so well, get that on site so that if you do have a problem, you can get that repaired.
Now, Ken and Devin, I don't know if you guys know this, and maybe Sean and Natalie, you know too. I know one user that they sell like these almost like a giant like litmus strip, and you shoot it, and it's going to measure more or less how strong your lamps are and whether or not you have an issue. So that's one thing that I know does exist in other technologies, but something to look for or an idea. It's like a giant, just like a litmus test basically to see what's firing and what's not.
Interesting. I wonder if that's readily available, because that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, I've heard of those actually. I've never used them myself, but I have seen them. I think they actually have them on Amazon. I've looked them up.
Yeah.
I'd like to back up 12 inches if I can, go back to the print heads. We often clean and purge and rinse our heads. Do you really ever take a look at the rack that heads are in? Right? I mean, you think you could have a print defect, but on the lead edge of your rack, you could actually have debris. So it's good to get in there with a wipe and a little bit of cleaner and just wipe around the heads. Obviously, you don't want to make a lot of contact with the heads. You want to try and avoid that. But let's get the frame clean all the way around, because if you end up with dust on it, you could be affecting, or even after it, right? It's even more important after the heads. Get in there and wipe it, because you could be dragging dust through and think you have a jet out and you in fact don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the times we see customers have, quality issues where it's like almost a line going through your varnish, and they think there's something wrong with their heads. But a lot of the times, like you said, it's around the print heads on the plate is needs to be cleaned. And like you said too, we don't want to use the lint-free cloths on the actual print heads, but what I do is kind of wrap it around my finger, and that way you can kind of get a good cleaning around your print heads on the actual plate. And then also to add what you said about cleaning the dryers, we'll see the same kind of quality issue with it dragging through the varnish before it's cured. And sometimes, on the LEDs, there's buildup from not cleaning regularly. And so what we can do is put that lint-free rag on the belt, and then through the pilot, advance your belt so you kind of have the lint-free rag on either side of the dryer, and then kind of floss it back and forth so you can clean the bottom of those dryers without removing them. So those
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the technique I use. So you are on it, Devin. I'd like to jump next to just a few things on iFOIL before I talk about environment, which I think is probably the biggest factor here. We want to look at that iFOIL just as thoroughly. That belt has a seam. We want to make sure that the seam is not fraying, it's not wearing. You need to make sure that that belt is tracking perfectly down the center. That's easily adjustable to be able to push that belt one way or another. So if you see your belt is starting to creep its way toward the back of the machine or toward you, and you're starting to get a little bit of a rough edge on the belt, that's easily rectified, and we can explain how to do that. But look at that regularly, because those belts are crucial, and you don't want to have one of those installed in an emergency. The other thing is the stamping roller itself. Many people, after a lot of use, have to change that stamping roller. What you need to do is you need to cut yourself some 1-inch wide, 80-pound cover. You need to slide them in there and drop that roller, and you need to pull on the ends and a couple in the center. What you're probably going to feel after a short amount of use is that the ones in the center are going to come out a little bit easier. That's okay. It's normal wear. You're going to be running a 18 or a 19-inch wide sheet, or in the case of the bigger machines, much bigger, but you're always going to be running down the center. And you don't want to find out when you have a big job that the center is finally given up and you can't get any pressure there anymore, because you're going to drop that roller as much as you can on the sides to increase the center pressure. There's only so far you can go. So that's one of those things that every year you want to evaluate, because you want to get those rollers on site and be ready to do it during downtime and not during the middle of a job, because that would be brutal amount of downtime.
Now, Ken and Devin, maybe you guys can answer this. I've heard two different stories on those rollers. Some people replace the rollers total, and I've heard of other people's getting them resurfaced. So what have you guys heard, and what's the word on that?
So I have heard of people resurfacing them. I'm not, I don't know. I've never done it myself. I think it's kind of hit or miss with getting it resurfaced. I think sometimes they can work out, and then sometimes we end up having to replace them anyways. So
right. So it depends on the quality of the person doing that resurfacing,
and just the damage of the roller in general. If there's damage that can't be fixed, then we'll just have to replace it.
Yeah, very good. Ken, what were you
sorry,
or were you resurfacing?
No, we would replace. I didn't trust it. I know a lot of roller companies that say they'll do it, but from my offset side of experience, this is too important, right? I mean, it's everything on the iFOIL. That roller is the be all and end all of success. So that's not something I was willing to risk. The other thing I want to mention too is, even if you don't have a lot of use on your machine, that roller gets super, super hot and expands a great deal, and then it contracts. And this happens, it can happen 30 times a day. So even if you think you're okay and you haven't had a lot of volume, and they said you could get, 500,000 sheets out of it, you just got to check it, because the way things contract and expand, it's unpredictable.
Well,
So
especially if you're sleeking envelopes like one guy that I know.
yeah, I sort of beat up the center on mine a little bit, but you're right. And the other thing too is to look at that roller. People forget that foil tends to flake off, especially the edges of your foil roll. And if you have specks of foil all over that stamping roller, you're not transferring heat in those spots, and often you're going to find you have pinholes, and you're looking at your sheet of foil and you're going, my foil looks great. Why am I getting pinholes? There's no low spots on the varnish. I don't understand. Those specks of foil that you get on that roller stop heat transfer. They'll actually act as an insulator. So cleaning that roller is not super easy, but it's something that you need to do regularly. So take a good look at that, especially if you're cutting your own foil. It's bad enough that some of the foil companies will cut and it'll be a little bit dull. But if you're cutting your own, I've seen it myself because I've done it myself thousands of times. It will transfer that over. So get that out of there. And the next thing I want to talk about is underneath the iFOIL. People forget about that. You've got compressors under there. You've got pneumatics happening under there. You got to give that the same treatment you gave your feeder. You need to take that cover off. You need to make sure that you drain those compressors regularly. Whether you're in a superhuman environment or not, compressed air does have water. You will get water out of it. So you need to drain those compressors regularly. Look at the filters down there. Look at the environment down there. You'll be surprised how dirty it gets.
Right.
So look at those compressors and give them an eyeball too. I find that those filters don't necessarily get as dirty, but it can affect your stamping pressure and it can affect just overall cleanliness of that unit. And that gets me one of the last things that I really want to talk about, and probably the most important, which is environment. We all look at the machine and we follow the book and we do the preventive maintenance and everything seems great, but people don't think about their environment. One of my favorites is the floor. So you get a little varnish, you get a little wash, you get a little moisture underneath the machine doing proper maintenance. Then the cleaning guy comes by at the end of the night with his dust mop and he gives everything a push in the shop. And at the edge, where does he go? Right up against the edge of that machine. And sometimes he'll go front and back. Well, that means he's pushing dust underneath your machine, little dust bunnies on a regular basis. They get into a little bit of remnant varnish that you didn't clean up, a little bit of flush solution that's on the floor, and you almost find it impossible to get under there and clean. But it's just so important. How many operators have seen somebody come into the digital room and drop a case of 80-pound cover on the floor and bam, it hits. Well, all that air and all that dust goes everywhere and ends up underneath your machine. What I used, and I know a lot of people use chipboard and they'll use some cover stock. It's absorbent. It can still pick up contamination. I don't know if you've seen these like trays that you can get for your oven. These aluminum trays. Underneath my varnish compartment and all the way around that area, I put those trays. So once a week, I pull them out. I give him a wipe and I slide him back under. He's not going to get his dust. The cleaning guy's not going to get his dust under this tray. So pull them out, wipe them down, clean them, slide them back under. You're done, right? It's super easy. The other thing that you forget about is the exhaust vents on your jet varnish. You've got DC fans that are pushing air up into whether it be a flume or above a drop ceiling or wherever that exhaust is going. Those DC fans need to be cleaned too, and you need to get your little vacuum in there and you need to clean those.
Yeah.
One of the last things I'll mention is any suspended lights that you've got over your machine or your air conditioning ducts. You want to impress your boss, you want to keep up on building maintenance, drop that vent or that cover on your air conditioning supply or your heating supply and wipe it down with a white rag and go show your boss and say, hey, look at what's coming out of our ducts. We need to get our filters changed more often on the roof because you're blowing all of that bad. And I've seen businesses that they've gone 2 years without replacing an air conditioning filter. Not only is it affecting your airflow in the building, but it's pushing all that dust straight into your jet varnish.
Are you making me want to go change my house air filter? I'm like,
well,
I'm trying to think when was the last time I changed.
It's something easily neglected, right? It's up on the roof, nobody thinks about it, but you're like, oh man, I keep getting so much dust. Where's it all coming from? So these are some of the things that involve in my silly mind as I would operate machine and go, how can I make this better? How can I keep the runs going longer? How can I keep the defects down? Obviously, your book has got a step-by-step guide to help you with some of those things, but hopefully I've mentioned some out-of-the-box type of suggestions that will improve your quality.
I think what's really important to jump in there too to mention is that the areas, Ken, that you're describing to help maintain performance, especially around the site environment, around those air filters, not only helps improve the performance of the KMMGI machines, but all of the digital technology that's out there runs similar in nature in terms of fans and PCB boards and electronic components that quite honestly don't like lots of dust buildup. I'm sure many people have had in their experience at some point the big tower computer that they may have had or not in their house that if you don't clean it every year ends up with just gunk built in, and that's a residential nature. When you talk about these systems being installed in a more industrious environment, it just elevates the need to have pure air for anything that has electronics. So not only are they going to improve that piece of equipment, but as a whole everything that happens to be in their shop.
Yeah, it's a great point. And also, I've had happen to me too, where I've had KM guys come in to work on the toner machines and leave the transfer units and the toner units out on the top of the machine. And then they vacuum it and the vacuum blows it around and the toner is pretty fine. So I had to start giving them a place to work on those units outside of my JETvarnish room. I had this beautiful Konica Minolta room with all this beautiful equipment, but so there's just some things that nobody thinks about, but you have to think about because you, as a JETvarnish operator, are kind of in a different zone. You're elevated a little bit, your attention to detail is a little bit better, your skill level may be quite a bit better, and the onus is on you to make sure that you have a perfect environment so you can keep creating great living work.
Yeah, we're big fans of the operators. They definitely, it's their machines, and those who wield those machines with the uncanny skill have our respect. Devin, tell us a little bit about on your side. I know that Ken may have not necessarily gone by what the official book says, but first off, do you agree with kind of what Ken was saying on what he's picked up, and what else is there that you think we should add to this conversation?
No, absolutely. I think everything Ken went over is actually things that I was going to mention, and some of this stuff I've actually, like the tray, for instance. I think that's a great idea. I haven't seen that, and I think that'd be very helpful to have something like that uh, in that area. I mean, some other things maybe we didn't mention. The larger machines, they have a few things that the smaller machines don't. You've got coming out the feeder, you've got the clean rollers, the blue and the green rollers. We recommend to clean those with just water and a rag, maybe weekly, depending on how much production you're running. Other things on the larger machines, they have, so for the UV curing on those, they have those large glass, quartz glass. We recommend maybe monthly taking those out and cleaning them. Those you can use alcohol to clean the glass with. And then I think he did mention, on the back side of the larger machines, you have all these fans that take the hot air out of the machine, and we recommend, cleaning those maybe biannually, just to get all the dust out of those. But yeah, everything that he touched on is good stuff. So
awesome. One last thing, and I think this came out after you bought your machine, Ken. So maybe Devin can kind of touch on it. The CTS, the Corona treater, is there any I think specific type of maintenance that you suggest the operators kind of put in around that?
yeah, so it depends. So the smaller units on the CTS, they have you have two options, whether you use the Corona ozone filter, which is a standalone unit that connects to it, or it can you can have it through the exhaust going through your building. So obviously, if you have the standalone filter, those have to be changed regularly, depending on the amount. And it has a counter on the pilot, so depending on how many sheets you're running, it keeps up and it lets you know, kind of like the other maintenance kits, when to replace those.
Very cool. Very cool.
Does a static tend to generate more contaminants around the Corona treatment, or no?
Yes, it can. It all depends on the type of substrate and what we're running.
So before we end, I did want to finish off. We do have a question up on the forum from somebody who posted, and the question was: did you see this one yet, or no, Devin or Ken? It popped up yesterday about somebody looking for a white foil. And I don't know if you guys have any recommendations around a white foil that works with their jet varnish.
Well, I mean, I think Crown will make just about anything, but it's the amount you have to purchase.
Right.
White specifically.
White specifically. Hold
Had
on.
it in my hand. I've experimented with it, but I don't remember where it came from.
I've tried it. I never got good success on solid areas. I always had success with finer type of details. So if I'm going to do like lettering, or if I'm going to do fine lines, stuff like that, I had a white that kicked butt back in the day. The question is, I don't know if Devin or even Sean, if you've heard anything recently. Coming from Jason Yurchak.
Yes, so I actually have been working with your check specifically, and they do something which is really quite unique too. They produce legal bound book covers, like a nice leatherette, beautiful. Go check out their website for those who haven't seen it before. And but what's unique about those dark green and dark navy book covers is you need to put a barcode sometimes on the back of them so you can barcode these pieces. Where the white foil becomes very important, so you can put that stamp of white foil down before that goes into your barcoding. And so they've experimented around with a few different manufacturers. I agree with Ken. Crown can make some stuff. I think they also tried perhaps some of the other vendors like K-Laser and Infinity, and they're looking for a nice big solid block, right? So we don't have it ready yet, but for those that are interested in white foil, do stay tuned because MGI continues to enhance our colored foil selection, including but not limited to the potential in the short-term future coming up. I can't speak too much about a white that is validated and compatible with the MGI digital hot foil technology. So I do know the Aircheck group. I'm working with them, quite frequently on that particular topic, and I think that would benefit other users that are looking for larger swaths of white foil too.
Thank you, Sean, for that answer. And guys, operators, if you have discovered a white that works now, that you can recommend to other operators, please don't hesitate. Go to the forum in the JetForce, or just email me, and we'll get that information out there. So anything else that we wanted to cover, gentlemen, in today's call? Anything else that we can think of? Sean, Devin, Ken?
I don't think
I mean, I think we talked about it pretty thoroughly, but I think it's underrated with the jet varnish. Anything you can clean when you're down, when you have a quiet moment. You might be watching another machine run, you might be watching a toner device kick out prints, but walk over and pick up a rag and look for the craziest corner. The inside of the covers, they've got lips inside. Wipe those off, wipe your handles off, anything that can pick up residue. Hopefully you're far away from the offset side of your shop, if in fact you have offset, but that powder travels a long way. So do yourself a favor and use that quiet idle time to save yourself problems down the road. I think you'll really be better for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Real quick, before we go next month, we have on February 20th, the next operator meetup. The theme is going to be foil application and troubleshooting on the jet varnish. So we're going to talk a little bit about foil, some of the ideas that we have. If you have questions, please send them, or please come to the meeting if you can. And if you can't, we understand you guys are busy running production. Hopefully you guys are running tons and tons of production, and that's the reason. But please send in your questions, and we'll try to get them on the next episode. So with that being said, I'd like to give a big thank you to Ken. As usual, my friend, I always learn when I get to sit down and open my ears when you talk. Really much appreciate it. And Devin, thank you very much for also helping bring some good education to everybody. So until next time, thank you, everybody, on behalf of MGI's JetForce. It's been a pleasure to host the session with Ken, and we will be talking to you very shortly. Thanks, everybody.